All right, I think now's a good time to get started. We've got a group here. So thanks everyone for joining. BlockApps was very excited to host this panel of experts to discuss restoring trust and confidence in political finance. 2019 Gallup study found that only 20% of Americans are satisfied with the nation's campaign finance system. And while there's been plenty of focus put on other proposed adjustments through regulatory policy initiatives, little attention has been paid toward improving the existing process of compliance and law enforcement around campaign finance. And today we have four distinguished guests to discuss the core issues affecting compliance and enforcement and what can be done to restore trust to the entire system. And so we'll start with just some brief introductions. Maybe we can start with Anne. If you could just give a bit of a background on yourself and your experience within the political campaign industry.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I have been a regulator in both the state and federal system. I was the chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission, and I was also the presidential nominated chair and vice chair commissioner of the Federal Election Commission as well. So I have quite a bit of familiarity with this issue, but my familiarity as a candidate occurred over the last year and a half when I ran for state senate in California. And the experience, let me say, is very different. So I have a lot to say about this issue, and I'm really glad to be here.
Great, thanks, Anne. Very unique experience having sat on both sides of the table there. Maybe Alex, if you'd like to go next, just an introduction on yourself. Alex, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on here. My name is Alex Voetsch, and I am a founding partner at Millennial Strategies, which is a campaign consulting firm based in New York State. Over the last 7 years, we have run campaigns from the smallest level of New York City Council all the way up to statewide things, and see the very unique issues that each size campaign has to focus on when it comes to campaign finance. As general consultants on campaigns, it's always our main goal to make sure that the team we're using, the technology we're using, and the strategy that we're using is all efficient and effective, as well as following all the legal rules. So we really focus in on finding products and tools that help facilitate all of that to make it easier and safer for all of our candidates. Previously to working with Millennial Strategies, I was the executive director of the New York Democratic Lawyers Council. So good government and compliance and things like that are very near and dear to my heart.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. And Brad, if you could give a brief intro as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's good to be with everyone today. I'm the CEO and founder of Hill East Group, which is a DC-based consulting group that does both government affairs and political consulting. I did about a decade in federal government service on the Hill. And then since then, I've been doing political consulting work, mostly working in federal House races, several in New York, and then some state and locals, as well as some kind of super PAC and independent outside group work as well. Like Alex, I'm a general consultant. And for those not in the kind of political space, we manage all the vendors, content. We manage often a big staff and a team. We advise the candidate and the staff, oversee all of the content, manage the calendar, and most importantly, as Alex kind of alluded to, is we oversee the budget, spending, and compliance aspects of the campaign to the best of our ability. And as he said, always looking for tools to make campaigns more efficient, more compliant, so that the campaign team can spend their time doing what they need to do. So good to be here today, and I look forward to this.
Thanks, Brad. And last, Will, would you give us a brief intro to For Us as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Will Schweitzer. I'm the founder and CEO of Schweitzer Laboratories. And kind of what brought us together all today is this new product that we've launched out of Schweitzer Laboratories called For Us. And the focus is on automating campaign finance compliance. So I'm really excited to be joined by the other members here today. I think we have a great perspective, with Ann's background in the regulator seat, and then having a Democrat and a Republican point of view, kind of to acknowledge that, compliance at the end of the day is this, ubiquitous issue that it doesn't take sides. Everybody has to kind of go through the process. So glad to be with everyone. For a little bit more background, what kind of led me into this is my experience at the intersection of emerging technology, national security, and politics. So I've been involved in campaigns and politics since 2008. Along the way, found my way into the special operations community, into the private intelligence world, and then got some insights and experience into different things happening in the geopolitical space, all connected to emerging technology and some really big picture problems that world leaders were trying to address. This is all relevant around the 2015 to 2018 kind of time period where a lot of things came into picture for me, and that was when For Us essentially was born. So again, I'm excited to be with you guys, excited to work with you guys at BlockApps on bringing this product together and to talk to everyone today about what we're doing and how we think it fixes some big issues for us as citizens, obviously understanding the practical element as well for anyone in political operations today or campaign operations today, and how the product works and how it is going to clean up a lot of the issues that everybody deals with. So glad to be here.
Perfect. Thanks, Will. And I think it's probably good to get started. There's many issues that are being discussed publicly regarding, politics and campaigns, but, why specifically is this, challenge most important to you, Will? And why did you decide to focus on political campaign finance specifically?
Yeah. So like I said, with my background, big picture trend that's happening across the globe and is being realized here in the United States is this all around decline in trust in democratic institutions. You just see here, like kind of public sentiment within the United States is at record lows, and it's been this way for a while now. So this is a really big issue, that I was putting my background and experience to work and trying to figure out, okay, well, how can we try and stem the tide here and restore trust? And that was kind of what led me through my own research and perspective to dig in on campaign finance. And the path to getting down to campaign finance compliance is a little, it's a little nuanced. So let me walk everybody through it. It's like how we get from, working at declining trust and, okay, let's solve issues in campaign finance compliance. But we think macro democracies are defined by elections. Elections are underpinned by campaigns, and campaign finance fuels campaigns. So as the stat that you led with in the beginning, alludes to, when you have a corrupted or perceived to be corrupted campaign finance system, it makes sense that you see the political system that sits on top of it suffer from the same level of corruption or perceived corruption. And then from there, that goes up into our democratic institutions, where our political leaders are the ones who, in their positions, are able to take control of different parts of the government, staff up the agency. And again, when you have a mistrust all the way down at the very beginning, this bubbles all the way up and is really at the heart of why there are so many issues with declining trust. So that was how I got to campaign finance compliance, and then looking through the lens of emerging technology and seeing some things in particular happening in the blockchain space that I thought was really applicable and really got the fire started to build For Us and get it going.
Great. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point you bring up that, corruption and perceived corruption both ultimately, ruin trust in the system. And so, where there's, goodwill on the participants, but potentially, challenges and just, creating that trust is, just as destructive in some cases as actual corruption. And we're lucky to have Brad and Alex both a Democrat and Republican viewpoints in this panel who agree across the board that this is an issue. And Maybe Alex, given your experience, obviously the goal is to, be as compliant and transparent as possible. And sometimes that's, can be challenging. Can you talk to us specifically about how challenging, just general data collection is today and how you've tried to deal with that in the past?
Sure. And you really hit the nail on the head with this. And one of the biggest problems with data collection is that we're often getting contributions from different sources. So a lot of people still want to give checks, particularly if they're high dollar contributions. So to avoid online processing fees, people are using services like ActBlue and NGP, which help to facilitate online contributions in very good ways. And then also, for example, in New York State, the Campaign Finance Board has their own contribution link that they encourage people to use that is not as easy for compiling all of the data together. So there really is no specific tool that helps you pull all this together in an automated way. Basically, what treasurers have to do is take all these different sources, enter them by hand into whatever central database you have. And one of the problems with this is that you don't catch any problems until after the fact. So for example, if someone goes online and makes a contribution that is over their limit, there's nothing that flags that. At the back end, the treasurer has to catch that. They have to send out a return contribution. If they don't catch it, they're possibly going to get fined for that. There are other vetting issues, for example, making sure that you have the right information that you need for your reporting. Again, in New York State, there are people that are on a doing business with the state list, and I think that's common across the country. So there's no way to really, if someone goes online and contributes, catch that until after the fact. So we end up spending a ton of time, and it's a very stressful time for our fundraisers and our treasurer just to make sure that everything is compliant, everything is organized, when a lot of that time could be better spent on the actual fundraising. And also, it's often the smaller campaigns that have a harder time with this because they have a less experienced treasurer, they have less staff that are able to do this. So these campaign finance systems and rules that are supposed to kind of level the playing field for everyone often put more of a burden on the smaller, more grassroots funded campaigns.
That's great, Alex, and yeah, it really highlights some of the issues both for large and smaller campaigns, and certainly gathering the data itself can be just quite difficult. And Brad, your experience, you've spent a lot of time managing and hiring staff, as well as preparing for disclosures and audits. Can you talk about some of the challenges, even once you have the data, in working through some of those processes, such that Alex mentioned, maybe you have a smaller staff, but you still have the same type of requirements that a larger campaign would have from the disclosure perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think, even for a really kind of veteran incumbent candidate who's done this many times and has a top-notch compliance firm, this is still a really sloppy, inefficient process. But the reality is that most campaigns, especially people who are running for office for the first time, for federal office in particular, it's a really sloppy startup. You have a very young team. We learned as a firm early on to make a requirement of taking on any new candidate that we get to bring in the compliance team, because it leads to such terrible problems and legal challenges. But very often you'll see very qualified people run for office and grab an uncle or a brother who's a CPA to do the compliance kind of bookkeeping treasurer role. That's a huge red flag for people like Alex and I, but it's very common. And so you're talking about the general consultant, a very young campaign manager, a new candidate, the candidate's spouse sometimes. These are the people that have their hands in a very highly regulated kind of campaign compliance world. No software tools that are really effective to help them do that. It's a really bad place to be starting from. You have changing rules and contribution limits every cycle that are growing, and you have people who are unqualified to be, answering regulatory questions, working on the campaign. And the FEC kind of review process for people like Alex and for the campaign staffs internally is a nightmare. I mean, as he said, we're issuing, pages and pages and pages of refunds of money that really we shouldn't have taken to begin with. It's perfectly allowed to refund that money. We're required to, but there's no way to stop us from taking those contributions to begin with. The process is, I mean, you'll laugh if you're not in the campaign world, but you are still getting a significant amount of contributions by paper check. That paper check gets mailed to 2 different PO boxes. A compliance person will sit down, manually input that information into a database that helps them kind of populate FEC reports. It takes, from the time you receive a paper contribution, it takes weeks to get into your system. So from a campaign efficiency standpoint, we're trying to work races, get TV buys placed. We have mail pieces that are going out. We're spending the money as soon as we get it, but it takes weeks for that money to actually show up on our balance sheet to be able to spend. So from an operational standpoint and from a compliance standpoint, it's a huge issue. The last thing I'll just mention, I think, this hits on kind of what Will was driving at too. There's definitely an increasing trend in terms of being able to screen certain types of contributions. I've been in part of political campaigns in the past. I'll give you a really quick example. We had a candidate that was attacking one candidate for being in the pocket of big oil. Turns out, unbeknownst to them, they were taking significant contributions from individuals that were in the oil and gas industry. Nothing wrong with that, certainly nothing illegal about that, but a huge political problem for a campaign. And as there's more scrutiny on kind of the source of campaign dollars and transparency, that's going to become an increasing need for campaigns.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, can see some significant challenges related to just the evolving dynamics and the pace of campaigns, coming from the ground up, but also just not only the legal requirements, but for their own, campaign process and political focus, making sure they know, where everything is coming from. And, and you've got a unique perspective. You've been both a regulator and a candidate. Does what Alex and Brad ring true for you, or what type of additional, insight would you have sitting on both sides of the table?
Thank you. Yeah, listening to both Alex and Brad, I was laughing internally because I had some of those exact same experiences as a candidate. And in particular, for example, I mean, I was a regulator, so I wanted to make sure that it looked like I was getting lots of small donors, and Citizens United was supporting me, and they were, getting small donors for me. The problem was, number one, if people do contribute on those platforms like ActBlue and NGP, it takes a while for those to translate to the campaign and to be able to be utilized by them. But also, the problem is that when there is some error that is even found, it's almost impossible. It was impossible for me. They would say to me, do you know who this person is? And can you give their profession and their address? He said, I have no idea who they are, because I had thousands of contributors, many of them, I didn't know them. And so that process was very frustrating as a candidate, extremely frustrating. And I also want to comment on the fact that when I was at the FPPC, which is the California regulator, of course, they also deal with town races, county races, and it is exactly true. Most of those people do not have a lot of money. They're much more unsophisticated. They think it's a local campaign. And so they do not hire people who have a lot of skills. Most of them, it was their spouse, or I never saw an uncle, but it was always, some relative who was doing it for free and had no idea what they were doing. And so doing compliance on those at the state level, of course, you do not want to go after people who make honest mistakes. But you don't always know what's an honest mistake and what isn't. And so it complicates it a lot for the regulators. And, definitely it's unavoidable that there's going to be those mistakes. And therefore it takes an enormous amount of time as well for the regulators to be combing through them and deciding whether it's something that is, purposeful or not. So I think that what they were saying was really, really significant on both sides, actually. And the reality is, and Will talked about this, and it is absolutely true, not only because of what the Supreme Court of the United States has said about it, but it's true just in general, that transparency leads to public trust. There is no question about it. And also for people who are running for office, and many people don't know these people, don't know what to believe. The issue for them is whether or not someone is taking oil money or whether somebody is doing something else. And when there are mistakes like that, when there's not the ability to be absolutely right about where those contributions are coming and where and what expenditures the campaigns are making, I think it leads to more dissatisfaction. And we know, and I know it was mentioned at the beginning by Will, but it is true statistically from polling, people have lost their faith, not just in institutions, but in particular in politicians. And it is those problems that are central to our democracy, in my opinion. And if we had a system like this that was so clear that everyone can comply, the committees won't be tarnished for things that are not really true or that are perfectly legal and fine. And the regulators will have a much easier chance to, one, give information to people about what needs to be, what the rules are, because the rules do change. Some of the rules are very complicated. And it is a much better system to have it the way that For Us is suggesting for both sides.
Thanks. And yeah, just recapping, it seemed like there's quite a few issues from just collecting the data, managing the data, managing the process, and from the regulator perspective, having to focus on where should we spend the time and effort, where were the honest mistakes, and for such an important institutional part of our democracy, it's a bit surprising how challenging it is, and how difficult it is even today for the Honest campaign to just participate in a clear and transparent way. I think, Anne, you said it best, if there was just additional transparency, that would drive trust. And so I guess turning back to Will, hearing all of these significant challenges, can you share with us about how For Us addresses these issues today?
Yeah, and we're not just going to, well, we will, I guess, talk about it, but I'm going to show you guys. We've lined up a demo, and I'm going to kick it off here in just a moment. So we'll just take a couple minutes to go through it. But yeah, just to, echo again what you just recapped, Mark, it's just obvious, right? And this was from my point of view, looking at, all of these issues. And it's so, we can all go on and lament for days, I think, about the challenges here in this space. So there's such a need, right, in this space. And we're talking now at the operations level, like within a committee, of like just how to get this done. And then we can also, move this up the value chain, if you will, into these big picture issues. And there's just such a need to address it. So, it's sad that we're in this state where things are so broken, and it's such a pain, but I'm glad that we're all kind of here together to take the next step forward, and really excited to show everyone here how For Us works and how we've approached solving really, I would say, kind of all of these issues in one really killer product. So let me turn on the video here.
Great. And just a quick reminder while this is getting set up for everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the Q&A, and we're going to leave some time at the end to answer as many of them as we can.
Within the dashboard. What we'll show you now is how For Us automates campaign finance compliance in real time and can stop non-compliant transactions from happening in the first place. A donor has come to the committee's webpage and wants to give $500. When they click donate, For Us is going to do a couple of things. First, For Us does ID verification to confirm who the donor is and assign an entity type. Based on the entity type, For Us then looks up the corresponding campaign finance law that governs the transactions that are allowed between that entity and the committee. For Us then tests the proposed transaction to confirm whether or not it would be in violation of the campaign finance law. If the transaction is deemed to be compliant, For Us then pushes the donor's information to a payment processor to facilitate the contribution. If the contribution is flagged to be non-compliant, the donor is alerted in real time right here on the page before money is ever moved. In the committee's dashboard, the contribution is populated in real time and comes along with a rich data set that the committee can leverage for disclosure when the time comes. Because For Us monitors the committee's bank account directly, when the bank settles transactions, For Us automatically updates the balance in the top bar, moving money from pending to now settled. At the same time, a block is generated on the committee's private blockchain containing all of the data that they need to disclose to the regulator. Next, we'll show you what happens when a donor proposes a transaction that would be in violation of campaign finance law. In this example, we see that this is the same donor who came in our previous transaction, and in this attempt is trying to give the committee $750. The max contribution limit in the state of Massachusetts, where this committee is running, is such that no individual can give the committee more than $1,000. We see here that For Us has identified this donor as a previous donor and that this proposed transaction would be in violation of the maximum contribution limit. The donor is then prompted right here on the screen about how they can adjust their contribution before money is ever moved and a non-compliant transaction takes place. The donor can quickly adjust their contribution with the guidance given by For Us and repropose the transaction within the limits. Within the committee's dashboard, we see that only the compliant transaction was processed. For Us can also accommodate paper checks that the committee wants to deposit in their bank account, which they may have collected at an event or have had mailed to them. To do this, the committee simply enters the donor information into the Create Contribution form and hits Submit to verify the compliance of the contribution before money is ever pushed. With compliance verified on each of the donors and their checks, the committee can then take the checks and deposit them in their bank account. For Us then monitors the bank account to confirm when the money is landed, and again, records the information needed for disclosure directly into the committee's private blockchain. Through the same process of ID verification, rule assignment, and real-time transaction monitoring, For Us also enables real-time compliance for all disbursements of committees. In some cases, disbursements may have occurred without For Us being prompted. The benefit of For Us monitoring the committee's bank account directly is that we still see all transactions in and out, whether or not the system has been preempted. In this example, a disbursement left the committee's account, and we can see that it needs some type of manual intervention in order to have the compliance verification finished. A committee simply has to click on the transaction, and For Us will tell them about what the issue is with it. For Us will maintain a persistent alert about each transaction until the committee takes the necessary actions to remedy the compliance violation. Because of these persistent alerts, committees will not lose sight of what their potential compliance issues are, even in the heat of the campaign. The final step in the compliance lifecycle of the committee is to generate their disclosure report. Because For Us has been monitoring the life cycle of every transaction in and out of the committee's bank account in real time, while maintaining rich data records about each transaction, For Us can quickly generate reports with all of the underlying information that committees need into the correct format given any jurisdiction that they reside in. All right.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's, I wanted to just show everybody. I think it's a little bit easier when, we just kind of move through the process, and certainly anybody who's in the space, hopefully can see what's going on there and, realize that this is a pretty, improved way of doing things, where For Us is basically just handling everything automatically, right?
the ability to monitor the transactions from the minute they're proposed all the way to on the back end, that they settle in the account. And the data that we're pulling is directly from how the financial institutions themselves reconcile the transactions in the back end, right? So the authority of the data, and I'm sure Anne can speak to this as well, but we approach the problem of trying to bring real compliance, and knowing that when a regulator is going to say bring an audit up against a committee and then go ahead and potentially prosecute a committee for any wrongdoing, what they're going to try to do, what the regulator is going to try to do, is subpoena the bank records directly, and that's the the ledger of truth, if you will, that underpins the financial system right now. So we understand how those data flows move today, and that was what was kind of the insight for being able to say, whoa, if we can just grab this data right at the moment when transactions are moving in the back end of the financial system, and then apply campaign finance law directly to them in that flow, boom, we've gone ahead and been able to prevent what would be non-compliant transactions in the first place, but also being able then to just take all the data that the committee today, as Alex and Brad alluded to or spoke directly about, is combing through different files and calling people and confirming information. In the data world, we just call that user-generated data. Ultimately, it's really not that reliable data anyways. So we just said, hey, let's source it from the banks themselves, slice it down into what the regulator requires them for every single transaction as it moves towards disclosure, and just do that in real time. And therefore, all the records are maintained, and we can talk a little bit, about the platform, how it's governed. This kind of gets into the magic of blockchain and what we're doing with Strato and all that. But if you think about the aspect of restoring trust, right, it's about understanding there's a system now that is just pulling this information right from the source. Thinking again from a law enforcement point of view, if they're going to go down any road of trying to figure out what happened, we're just saying, great, we sourced the information to fill out your compliance reports right from that primary source as well, which all of this process and all of this kind of primary sourcing is meant to restore trust overall, that folks who political committees who run on for us are just playing by the rules, and it's automated, and it's transparent, and it's known to the constituents overall. So that was really the a lot of the why, and we saw a little bit of the how of what For Us is doing. So excited about it.
Yeah, very exciting to see. I would say, from a BlockApps perspective, we see and hear a lot about, different ways blockchain can be applied. It's always nice to see an actual product that's working, in the blockchain space. And I think, the demo highlighted a number of things, but certainly being able to marry real-time compliance with the data, as it's being captured seems, like such a strong component of the system. And Alex, if you could speak to a little bit, you talked about the challenges with data collection. How do you see For Us specifically, helping alleviate those challenges for campaigns of all sizes?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic question. So we always say on campaigns that you have two main resources, which are time and money, and you really only have one, because time is money in a lot of ways. And so as it applies to this, the automation that Will just went through really does save us a lot of time. And whether it's real money because you're paying a compliance person by the hour to do some of this stuff, or it just takes your internal team, your fundraisers, your treasurer, a lot less time to track down missing information, to enter things by hand. That's time that they can be spending on other aspects of the campaign, which is really important. One thing that you may all find is really crazy is on a campaign, for the campaign manager and for me as a general consultant, it's sometimes really hard to know how much money we have. And as money's constantly coming in towards the end of the campaign, and you're trying to plan all your spending, that's a really important thing. But right now, we're going to the treasurer and finding out what's in the bank account, trying to subtract all the checks that are out that aren't cashed yet. the returns, as we talked about, you often have to return checks. Is that in or out of the bank account? And then are we waiting on a check from Act Blue to come in? How many checks are we waiting to come in? It's really actually a huge time waste to try to figure out how much money you have, as crazy as that sounds. Whereas something like this that automates all that and provides a dashboard where me as a consultant or a campaign manager that really doesn't have anything to do with the compliance can just go in, check, and see very easily and simply how much is on its way in, how much you can spend. That's a huge lifesaver. There's also a really, what I saw in this, a really exciting fundraising tool, whereas this program is able to tell you if a donor is over the limit. It also can tell the donor if they're under the limit. So for example, if the limit is $1,000 and a donor had given maybe $500 earlier and they go to give another $350, it can automatically at the point of that sale say, hey, you have an extra $150 before the limit. Do you want to give that now? And so we spend a lot of time going through our filings, figuring out who still has room to give, who we need to call, doing all that. And this is a way that can sort of use that social pressure to automate that, get more money in the door, and eliminate the need to do all that. So that's really exciting to me from a fundraising perspective. And then finally, as Will went into, everyone is terrified about fines. They cost you money, particularly on as Brad mentioned, big campaigns just as well as small campaigns. You have a lot of people who haven't done this before, and being able to avoid the fines before they happen, or being able to just avoid having to jump through hoops to address those later on is a huge real money savings and time saving.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. And I'd say the first part of transparency you discussed is just understanding yourself. The second part is being able to communicate that, to, ultimately the public through the regulator. Brad, can you talk a little bit about how you see For Us helping in those disclosures and being able to flow transparency through to the end in public?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put in words. You're essentially digitizing a unbelievably stressful and inefficient process that's really never been digitized before. It's still kind of a handshake, check delivery, wait for the PO box delivery business, and this just completely digitizes it. Avoiding those FEC issues absolutely important. You don't even want to get an FEC letter, asking a question about. Those are public letters, right? All these things are headaches and constraints on your time. And then I can't, understate how important it is to try to kind of fight off some of these political issues, and being able to add a filter to this platform that really allows you to exclude certain dollars and categories of dollars and categories of donors. I mean, I really can't stress you enough how popular I think that's going to become over the next couple cycles. And so this is just really the only tool that I'm aware of that allows you to do that in a really efficient and compliant way.
Thank you. And then, briefly back to Will, how do you see the role of blockchain in helping underpin, the solution and the system overall?
Yeah, I mean, it was really the aha moment for me back in 2018, looking at some things happening in the financial services world in other places and seeing how blockchain was being leveraged, in particular for KYC standardization and sharing between large financial institutions. So for those who don't know, it's called Know Your Customer data, which is all that information I was talking about, like that the banks have that we source originally. The banks have to gather all this information when you go and set up a bank account. And blockchain has been leveraged in different ways to standardize that information so that banks can share that information among themselves, all with the purpose of alleviating the regulatory and compliance burdens that they have in different use cases. So to me, I was looking at this general concept and I said, okay, well, if you can take that type of data and you can do this type of thing over in that space, I understood the problems in campaign finance and compliance specifically. And I said, oh, here's something we can do. So it's not the same exact use case and how we built out Strato for us. But what's really compelling, and I know Ann can speak about this too, is the two main components that we leverage with Strato is number one, smart contract, which just gives governance to the entire process flow, right? So we've taken now a manual process and where there's a whole bunch of variables based on expertise and experience and best practices. We've standardized it now down just to a data flow of the raw and primary data, and we've locked that in essentially via smart contract, which governs how we collect that information, how we apply campaign finance law, how we get the outcomes, how that information is shared with the committee, and then how that information is shared with the regulator. The other component of it is about having a rules engine, which is we call it the campaign finance law rules engine. But for us, is intended to be delivered at a system level for all regulators to participate on directly as well, so that they are actually the ones who are creating the rules engine for their given jurisdiction, so that all of the committees that are signed up and that they have their jurisdiction over are automatically operating under their purview and under the rule book that they themselves wrote and assigned to all of those committees. And then it's locked in through that smart contract governance process as well. And I know Ann can talk about some of the issues of like the regulator side of how difficult it can be to get people to understand what the rules are, how they're changing, how important that is from all the work that they do on that end too.
Yeah, I think, and kind of a two-part question here, folding in what we just saw is, what are the benefits, from your point of view, being able to write and deploy rules across, the system in real time, but then B, do you see, regulators having to understand blockchain in order to, trust and accept new systems like this? It's kind of a two-part question for you.
Yeah, there's definitely a really good idea. It is to have the rule changes, because while there aren't constant rule changes, there's sometimes little tweaks through auditing and all of those things that it's very difficult for people to keep up. And from the regulator point of view, I mean, I can say this in particular at the federal level, the FEC spent an inordinate amount of time and money, and still do, even though they're probably not doing as many of these programs all across the country. But when I was there, you'd go to various, once a year, all the commissioners and a number of the people who were administrative would go to various areas of the country to explain the rules and explain the rule changes. And that was not only expensive, but really time consuming to prepare, to do those in-person meetings. And they continue to do a lot of that work, have to put together webinars and other ways to constantly give new information to people. But not everybody is sitting around reading the FEC regulations. So it's complicated. And it not only is complicated for the people who have to comply, but it takes an enormous amount of resources and time for the regulator as well. So I think having those rules incorporated in a way that people will know that they can rely on it is a really good thing. And yes, a lot of times government employees are somewhat, if not resistant, new to issues like blockchain and whether or not it's going to be valid. But I don't think that, I think that this is going to be such a benefit for them that while they will probably spend time initially checking to make sure that there aren't inconsistencies or problems with what is being provided, I think ultimately it will be adopted and certainly maybe the FEC will take a little more time to do it because it's hard for them to do anything. But it certainly will be very useful for states which don't have resources to do these things. And I think that there will be much more likelihood that states will be very welcoming of this kind of system. I know when I was at the FPPC, I used to say it, so it's funny that we're actually doing something that I thought was a good idea, but you couldn't do it probably legally, was why can't we just claw into people's bank accounts and get this directly? Because it's so important to get the information early. And I think that this will really help not only the regulators, but it will also certainly make it much easier for the committees to comply, and they don't have to spend their time trying to figure out the regulations as well, because as has already been said by both Brad and Alex, a lot of the work of the committees is really to raise money and to spend it quickly during the election, and this hampers that.
Perfect, thank you. And we want to save enough time for Q&A, but maybe just one last question for Will here. Where is the product currently, and what are your upcoming next steps with your solution?
Yeah, so it's an exciting time. We've launched the product and we're moving forward with early customers. So if anybody out there listening is in the compliance space, if you're a political consultant, if you're a candidate or you're thinking about being a candidate in the upcoming 2022 cycle, kind of wherever you are, we would love to chat with you. I'll say that we, as I hope it came through, but the system is, dynamic enough, and we built it in such a way that we can account for every jurisdiction and make it consumable for every single level of committee. So we work with people at the local level, at the state level, all the way up to the federal level. So we would just love to talk to anybody out there who's interested in this. We've been having some great conversations with folks all over kind of the map in the political sphere, with all the positive reactions that we were hoping for when you put a new product out there. Kind of test your baby, out in the deep water. But it's really been great, and we're just excited to get it into more people's hands. So give us a shout. SchweitzerLabs.com. I know we'll put it around the link somewhere after the webinar, or even maybe drop it in the chat here now. But you can just fill out the form there, or you can connect with me directly. I'm Will at SchweitzerLabs.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I feel like Pete Buttigieg right now, go to PeteButtigieg.com. But we're excited to work with folks, and we're here. We think it's going to be a pretty transformative, part of campaign operations moving forward.
Perfect. And, just a quick shout out to all the participants. We've still got 50 plus individuals listening in towards the end. So thank you all for attending, and we'll address some of the questions here as well. One that, I think, is quite interesting is, how does this system scale if you're supporting multiple candidates in national, state, and local elections? Maybe Will, you can talk a little bit about how you see this scaling to support that level of interest.
Yeah, without getting into like the technical weeds of it all, I think I'll just go ahead and I'll make one point of clarification I don't think we brought it up before, but just so everyone knows, like every committee is set up with their own private blockchain, and that being really core to the system, so it's not a public ledger. It's not, a system where everybody is going to see everything in real time. Kind of the way that it works is that every committee's transactions are populating in their own private blockchain, which is enabled by Strato, which is one of the really awesome features about Strato, and why we're so excited to work with you guys at BlockApps. But at that point, once the disclosure day comes along, if you will, all of that information that the committee has in their private blockchain, as we said, we go through an ETL process to feed it to a regulator through their e-filing system, or the full vision of the platform is that the regulator's on the system itself, and then we just essentially release the data to them right now. But as far as scaling, we feel confident with where we're at, in that it's built to last, built to go big. So yeah.
Perfect. And here's a question that came in a few ways, and It might be good for anyone who's interested to speak on this, but there's certainly, changes, and, it's an evolving and dynamic environment. How does this system, help support campaigns, knowing that there may be, rules changing? You may have donors that their information is changing. I don't know, whoever feels most interested to talk about that. How do you see for us basically supporting the change in the dynamic environment of, political campaign financing?
Yeah, I think I'll tackle that one. The for us changes essentially at the pace of the regulators. I think I'll narrow it in on that. But as the regulators, change different laws, or, as Ann said, make tweaks to the rules, that's where we make adjustments in the system today to mirror those changes. As the world's evolving, I know in like kind of a post-COVID, or not post, but a current COVID, life for all of us. There's something that's interesting about, kind of timing and for us coming out, is that there's certainly been a move to, and I'm sure Brad and Alex can talk to this too, but there's already been a large trend in online contributions, moving this way already. And now folks are finding more ways to, facilitate payments online. And for us, as we mentioned, is not, or in the video, hopefully it comes out that we're not a payment processor ourselves. We're more of a payment facilitator. So, a donor comes and says, I want to give this committee this, this money. They choose the method, which is a credit card, or maybe they write a check. And then for us, works with the committee to leverage the most, we'll say the most cost-effective mechanism to get that money into the committee's bank account, right? So that can be a combination of different payment processors, going through bank-to-bank transactions directly. However, the transaction wants, the donor and the committee want the transaction to be facilitated, we can accommodate for that. And that is a little bit more into, how payments are evolving. Banks are starting to open up a little bit here and there in the US, so that fintech kind of products similar to For Us, we can come in and take over, payment initiation, and facilitate it through these flows, which is the point here is for campaign finance, ensuring that it is a compliant and transparent flow, first and foremost.
Yeah, maybe Ann or anyone else who thinks, if you want to chat about how this helps with just the changing dynamics.
I have a speech to give at a college,
Okay.
so I'm going to have to get off right now. But
Okay.
I totally agree with Will on this. So thank you all. I'm sorry to have to.
No, thanks, Ann.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate the
Thank
time.
you. Okay.
Maybe Brad or Alex, any other comments on just how this helps with an evolving and changing dynamic in the political campaign space?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of, saying evolving and changing is the key term here, and having a platform that can evolve and change with a lot of these regulations, and also get out ahead of them. Because I think we're, as we all discussed, going to see more and more campaign finance changes across the board. Being kind of the first to this space and being flexible is huge. It'll be key.
I mean, I would just add, I don't like, I think ultimately the regulators are going to really adopt the tool, because there's just no way they're going to not want to pass up the opportunity to do this in real time. The amount of time that the FEC takes to review certain issues and even just answer questions from the campaign could be weeks or months, and they have to operate under a quorum. There's all these political issues that go into that. And so I'm really optimistic that regulators will fully embrace this. And the ability to scale would be to any campaign that wants to use it. It's really got incredible potential.
Perfect. And just one last question really quickly, getting this question a few times. In terms of Bitcoin donations, what's your opinion, Will, in terms of how the platform will handle this going forward?
Yeah, given the audience, I would have been upset if we didn't get this this question. So, you know, I'll categorically just state that whatever the law says, you know, is the way that, you know, you need to account for Bitcoin or any crypto contribution, you know, for us can accommodate that. So I was reading through the question, there were even the questions here. There was even a notion about, you know, AML or KYC, you know, data about crypto wallets and crypto wallet holders. I believe through the FEC, I looked at it just yesterday, but I believe through the FEC's guidance, you know, they require that there has been KYC done on the wallet holder. So you know, there are a handful of folks in the crypto space who are providing that kind of similar touch and feel about knowing who, you know, is the identity, you know, who holds the wallet, and all of that. So that is, I think, the core issue when it comes down to compliance. It is about knowing who's giving what. You know, the fear on this side of the compliance sense, and noting that our main mission here is restoring trust. You know, is that if you have, you know, a black box kind of currency base, you know, and if there is no ownership or known, you know, ownership of where these funds came from, I think that's a huge potential risk into going really deep and long with you know, crypto into political financing, such that the law today requires disclosure. So, you know, if there are more vehicles, you know, if it's a vehicle that is built and focused on not doing that, that becomes problematic for society kind of at large. But, you know, for those of us in the compliance space too, it's kind of a headache, kind of a burden to get our heads around, you know, how to handle that as well. But we can definitely account for it because the FEC has given guidance on how to do this. We just follow those laws, and it's just another part of the rules engine.
Perfect. And I know we're a bit over time. Thanks everyone who's continued to stay with us. If you have any further questions, you can reach Brad at Hill East, Alex at Millennial Strategies, myself with BlockApps, and Will in the For Us platform at schweitzerlabs.com. So thanks everyone for your attendance. We hope you found it beneficial today, and we look forward to connecting again soon.
Thanks, everyone.